Oh yeah, chapter 2. Ultima slipped easily into the routine of our daily life. The first day she put on her apron and helped my mother with breakfast. Later she swept the house and helped my mother wash our clothes in the old washing machine they pulled outside where it was cooler under the shade of the young elm trees. It was as if she had always been there, or been here. My mother was very happy because now she had someone to talk to and she didn't have to wait until Sunday when her women friends from town came up the dusty path to sit in the sala and visit. Deborah and Teresa were happy because Ultima did many of our household chores they normally did, and they had more time to spend in the attic and cut out an interminable train of paper dolls which they dressed, gave names to, and most miraculously made talk. My father was also pleased now he had one more person to tell his dream to. My father's dream was to gather his sons around him and move westward to the land of the setting sun, to the vineyards of California, but the war had taken his 3 sons. It made him bitter. He often got drunk on Saturday afternoons, and then he would rave against old age. He would rage against the town on the opposite side of the river, which drained a man of his freedom. And he would cry because the war had ruined his dream. It was very sad to see my father cry, but I understood it because sometimes a man has to cry even if he is a man. And I was happy with Ultima. We walked together in the llano and along the riverbanks to gather herbs and roots for our medicines. She taught me the names of plants and flowers, of trees, of bushes, and birds and animals, but most important, I learned from her that there was a beauty in the time of day and in the time of night, and that there was a peace in the river and in the hills. She taught me to listen to the mystery of the groaning earth and to feel complete in the fulfillment of its time. My soul grew under her careful guidance. I had been afraid of the awful presence of the river, which was the soul of the river, but through her I learned that my spirit shared in the spirit of all things, but the innocence which our isolation sheltered could not last forever, and the fares of the town began to reach across our bridge and enter my life. Ultima's owl gave the warning that the time of peace on our hill was drawing to an end. It was Saturday night. My mother had laid out our clean clothes for Sunday Mass, as we had gone to bed early because we always went to early Mass. The house was quiet, and I was in the midst of some dream when I heard the owl cry its warning. I was up instantly, looking through the small window at the dark figure that ran madly towards the house. He hurled himself at the door and began pounding. Mares, he shouted. Mares, ándale, hombre. I was frightened, but I recognized the voice. It was Jason's father. Un momento, I heard my father call. He fumbled with the farol. Ándale, hombre, ándale, Chavez cried pitifully. Mataron a mi hermano. Ya vengo. My father opened the door and the frying man burst in. In the kitchen, I heard my mother moan. Ave Maria Purísima, mis hijos. She had not heard Chavez's last word, and so she assumed the aviso was one that brought bad news about her sons. Chavez, ¿qué pasa? My father held the trembling man. Mi hermano, Chavez sobbed. He has killed my brother. Pero ¿qué dices, hombre? My father exclaimed. He pulled Chavez into the hall and held him to the pharaoh. The light cast by the pharaoh revealed the wild, frightened eyes of Chavez. Gabriela, my mother cried and came forward, but my father pushed her back. He did not want her to see the monstrous mask of fear on the man's face. It is not our sons, it is something in town. Get him some water. Lo mató, Chavez repeated. Get hold of yourself, hombre. Tell me what has happened. My father shook Chavez and the man's sobbing subsided. He took the glass of water and drank, then he could talk. And although has just brought the news, my brother is dead. He sighed and slumped against the wall. Chavez's brother was the sheriff of the town. The man would have fallen if my father had not held him up. Madre de Dios, who, how? Lupito, Chavez cried out, his face corded with thick veins. For the first time, his left arm came up and I saw the rifle he held. Jesus, Maria, y Jose, my mother prayed. My father groaned and slumped against the wall. Ay, que Lupito, he shook his head. The war made him crazy. Chavez regained part of his composure. Get your rifle, we must go to the bridge. The bridge. Ronaldo said to meet him there. The crazy bastard has taken to the river. My father nodded silently. He went to the bedroom and returned with his coat. While he loaded his rifle in the kitchen, Chavez related what he knew. My brother had just finished his rounds, he gasped. He was at the bus depot cafe having coffee, sitting without a care in the world, and the bastard came up to where he sat and without warning shot him in the head. His body shook as he retold the story. Perhaps it is better if you wait here, hombre, my father said with consolation. No, Chavez shouted. I must go. He was my brother. My father nodded. I saw him stand beside Chavez and put him around his shoulders, his arm around his shoulders. Now he too was armed. I had only seen him shoot the rifle when we slaughtered pigs in the fall. Now they were going armed for a man. Gabriel, be careful, my mother called as my father and Chavez slipped out into the dark. See, I heard him answer. Then the screen door banged. Keep the doors locked. My mother went to the door and shut the latch. We never locked our doors, but tonight was something strange and fearful in the air. Perhaps this is what drew me out into the night to follow my father and Chavez down to the bridge, or perhaps it was some concern I had for my father. I do not know. I waited until my mother was in the sala, and then I dressed and slipped downstairs. I glanced down the hall and saw candlelight flickering from the sala. That room was never entered unless there were Sunday visitors or unless my mother took us in to pray novenas and rosaries for my brothers at war. I knew she was kneeling at her altar now praying. I knew she would pray until my father returned. I slipped out the kitchen door and into the night. It was cool. I sniffed the air. There was a tinge of autumn in it. I ran up the goat path until I caught a sight of two dark shadows ahead of me, Chavez and my father. We passed Fio's dark house and then the tall juniper tree that stood where the hill sloped down to the bridge. Even from this distance, I could hear the commotion on the bridge. As we neared the bridge, I was afraid of being discovered as I had no reason for being there. My father would be very angry. To escape detection, I cut to the right and was swallowed up by the dark brush of the river. I pushed through the dense bosque until I came to the bank of the river. From where I stood, I could look up into the flooding beams of the light that were pointed down by the excited men. I could hear them giving frenzied, shouted instructions. I looked to my left where the bridge started and saw my father and Chavez running towards the excitement at the center of the bridge. My eyes were not accustomed to the dark, but it was a glint of light that made me turn and look at a clump of bulrushes into the sweeping water of the river just a few yards away. What I saw made my blood run cold. Crouched in the reeds and half submerged to the muddy waters lay the figure of Lupito, the man who had killed the sheriff. The glint of light was from the pistol he held in his hand. It was frightening enough to come upon him so suddenly. But as I dropped to my knees in fright, I must have uttered a cry because he turned and looked directly at me. At that same moment, a beam of light found him and illuminated a face twisted with madness. I do not know if he saw me or if the light cut off his vision, but I saw his bitter, contorted grin. As long as I live, I will never forget those wild eyes, like the eyes of a trapped, savage animal. At the same time, someone shouted from the bridge, "There!" And all the lights found the crouched figure. He jumped, and I saw him as clear as it were daylight. "Aye!" he screamed, a blood-curdling cry that echoed down the river. The men on the bridge didn't know what to do. They stood transfixed, looking down at the madman waving the pistol in the air. "Aye!" he cried again. It was a cry of rage and pain, and it made my soul sick. The cry of a tormented man had to come to the peaceful green mystery of my river, and the great presence of the river watched from the shadows and deep recesses, as I watched from where I crouched at the bank. Japanese soldier, he cried. "I am wounded, come help me." He called to the men on the bridge. The rising mist of the river swirled in the beams of spotlights. It was like a horrible nightmare. The rising mist of the river. Suddenly he leaped up and ran splashing through the water towards me. The lights followed him. He grew bigger, heard his panting. The water, his feet kicked up, splashed on my face, and I thought he would run over me. Then, as quickly as he had sprinted in my direction, he turned and disappeared again into the dark clumps of the reeds in the river. The lights moved in all directions, but they couldn't find him. Some of the lights swept over me. I trembled with fear that I would be found out, or worse, that I would be mistaken for Lupito and shot. "The crazy bastard got away," someone shouted on the bridge. "Hey!" The scream sounded again. It was a cry that I did not understand, and I'm sure the men on the bridge did not either. The man they hunted had slipped away from human understanding. He had become a wild animal, and they were afraid. Damn, I heard them cursing themselves. Then a car with a siren and flashing red light came on the bridge. It was Vigil, the state policeman who patrolled our town. "Chavez is dead," I heard him shout. "He never had a chance. His brains blown out." There was silence. "We have to kill him." Jason's father stood, shouted. His voice was full of anger, rage, and desperation. "I have to deputize you," Vigil started saying. "The hell with deputizing," Chavez shouted. "He killed my brother. Está loco." The men agreed with their silence. "Have you spotted him?" Vigil asked. "Just now we saw him, but we lost him. He's down there," someone added. "He is an animal, has to be shot," Chavez cried out. "See," the men agreed. "Now wait a moment." It was my father who spoke. I did not know what he said because of the shouting. In the meantime, I searched the dark of the river for Lupito. I finally saw him. He was about 40 feet away, crouched in the reed as before. The muddy waters of the river lapped and gurgled savagely around him. Before the night had been only cool. Now it turned cold, and I shivered. I was torn between a fear that made my body tremble and a desire to help the poor man, but I could not move. I could only watch like a chained spectator. "Maras is right," I heard a booming voice on the bridge. In the lights, I could make out the figure of Narciso. There was only one man that big and with that voice in town. I knew that Narciso was one of the old people from Las Pasturas and that he was a good friend to my father. I knew they often drank together on Saturdays, and once or twice he had been to our house. "Por Dios, hombres," he shouted. "Let us act like men. That is not an animal down there. That is a man, Lupito. You all know Lupito. You know that the war made him sick, but the men would not listen to Narciso. I guess it was because he was the town drunk, and they said he never did anything useful." So yeah, the battery to my Light is dying. So I'm gonna try to just finish this next chapter and just call it a day on reading this. Go back to your drinking and leave this job to men, one of them jeered at him. He killed the sheriff in cold blood, another added. Another the sheriff had been greatly admired. I'm not drinking, Narciso persisted. It is you men who are drunk for blood. You have lost your reason. Reason, Chavez countered. What reason did we have for killing my brother? You know, he addressed the men. My brother did no one harm. Tonight's a mad animal crawled behind him and took his life. You call that reason? That animal has to be destroyed. See, the men shouted in unison. At least let us try to talk to him, Narciso begged. I knew that it was hard for a man of the Llano to beg. Yes, Vito added. Perhaps he will give himself up. Do you think he'll listen to talk? Chavez jumped forward. He's down there, and he still has the pistol that killed my brother. Go down and talk to him. I could see Chavez shouting in Vigil's face, and Vigil said nothing. Chavez laughed. This is the only talk you will understand. He turned and fired over the railing of the bridge. His shots roared and whirred away down the river. I could hear the bullets make splashing noises in the water. Wait, Narciso shouted. He took Chavez's rifle and with one hand held it up. Chavez struggled against it, but Narciso was too big and strong. I will talk to him, Narciso said. He pushed Chavez back. I understand your sorrow, Chavez, he said, but one killing is enough for tonight. The men must have been impressed by his sincerity because they stood back and waited. Narciso leaned over the concrete railing and shouted down into darkness. Hey, Lupito, it is me, Narciso, it is me, hombre, your compadre. Listen, my friend, a very bad business has happened tonight, but if we act like men, we can settle it. Let me come down and talk to you, Lupito. Let me help you. I looked at Lupito. He had been watching the action on the bridge, but now as Narciso talked to him, I saw his head slump on his chest. He seemed to be thinking. I prayed that he would listen to Narciso and that the angry and frustrated men on the bridge would not commit mortal sin. The night was very quiet. The men on the bridge awaited an answer. Only the lapping water of the river made a sound. Amigo, Narciso shouted. You know I'm your friend. I want to help you, hombre. He laughed softly. Hey, Lupito, you remember just a few years ago before you went to the war? You remember the first time you came into the A-ball to gamble a little? Remember how I taught you how Juan Botas marked the aces with a little tobacco juice and he thought you were green, but you beat him? He laughed again. Those were good times, Lupito, before the war came. Now we have this bad business to settle, but we are friends who will help you. I saw Lupito's tense body shake. A low and mournful cry tore itself from his throat and mixed into the lapping sound of the waters of the river. His head shook slowly, and I guess he must have been thinking and fighting between surrendering and remaining free and hunted. And like a cold spring, he jumped up, his pistol aimed straight up. There was a flash. I think he killed himself. There was a flash of fire and a loud report of the pistol, but he had not fired on Narciso or any of the men on the bridge. The spotlights found him. There's your answer, Chavez. He's firing, another voice shouted. He's crazy. The Pito pistol sounded again. Still, he was not aiming at the men on the bridge. He was shooting to draw their fire. Shoot, shoot, someone on the bridge called. No, no, I whispered through clenched lips, but it was too late for anything. The frying men responded by aiming their rifles over the side of the bridge. One single shot sounded, then a barrage followed it, like the roar of a cannon, like the rumble of thunder in a summer thunderstorm. Many shots found their mark. I saw Lupito lifted off his feet and hurled back forward by the bullets, but he got up and ran limping and crying towards the bank where I lay. Bless me, I thought he cried. And the second volley of shots from the bridge sounded, but this time they sounded like a great wailing of wings, like pigeons swirling to roost on the church top. He fell forward, then clawed and crawled out of the holy water of the river onto the bank in front of me. I wanted to reach out and help him, but I was frozen by my fear. He looked up at me, and his face was bathed in water and flowing hot blood, but was also dark and peaceful as it slumped into the sand of the riverbank. He made a strange gurgling sound in his throat, then he was still. Upon the bridge, a great shout went up. The men were already running to the end of the bridge to come down and claim the man whose dead hands dug into the soft, wet sand in front of me. I turned and ran. The dark shadows of the river enveloped me as I raced for the safety of home. Branches whipped at my face and cut it. The vines and tree trunks caught at my feet and tripped me. In my headlong rush, I disturbed sleeping birds, and their shrill cries and slapping wings hit on my face. The horror of darkness had never been seen. The horror of darkness had never been so complete as it was for me that night. I started praying to myself from the moment I heard the first shot, and I never stopped praying until I reached home. Over and over through my mind ran the words of the act of contrition. I had not yet been to catechism, nor had I made my first Holy Communion, but my mother had taught me the act of contrition. I was to be said after one made his confession to the priest and as the last prayer before death. Did God listen? Would he hear? Has he seen my father on the bridge? And where was Lupito's soul winging to? Or was it washing down the river to the fertile valley of my uncle's farms? A priest could have saved Lupito. Why did my mother dream for me to be a priest? How would I ever wash the sainted blood from the sweet waters of my river? I think at that time I began to cry because I left the river brush and headed up the hill that heard my sobs for the first time. It was also then that I heard the owl between my grasp for air and my sobs. I stopped and listened for its song. My heart was pounding and my lungs hurt, but a calmness had come over the moonlit night when I heard the hooting of ULTIMA's owl. I stood still for a long time. I realized that the owl had been with me throughout the night, had watched over all that had happened on the bridge. Suddenly the terrible dark fear that had possessed me was gone. I looked at the house that my father and my brothers had built on the juniper patch hill. It was quiet and peaceful in the blue night. The sky sparkled with a million stars and the virgin's horn moon, the moon of my mother's people, the moon of the lunas. My mother would be praying for the soul of Lupito. Again the owl sang. Ultima's spirit bade me with a strong resolution. I turned back and looked across the river. Some light shone in the town. In the moonlight I could make out the tower of the church, the schoolhouse top, and the way beyond the glistening of the town's water tank. I heard the soft wail of a siren. I knew the men would be pulling Lupito from the river. The river's brown waters would be stained with blood forever and ever and ever. In the autumn, I would have to go to the school in town. In a few years, I would go to the catechism lessons in the church. I shivered. My body began to hurt from the beating it had taken from the brush of the river, but what hurt more was that I had witnessed for the first time the death of a man. My father did not like the town or its way. When we had first moved from La Pasturas, we had lived in a rented house in the town, but every evening after work, he had looked across the river to these barren, empty hills, and finally he had bought a couple of acres and began building our house. Everyone told him he was crazy, that the rocky, wild hill could sustain a life, and my mother was more than upset. She wanted to buy along the river where the land was fertile and there was water for plants and trees. But my father won the fight to be close to his llano, because truthfully our hill was the beginning of the llano. From here it stretched away as far as the eye could see to La Pasturas and beyond. The men of the town had murdered Lupito, but he had murdered the sheriff. They said the war had made him crazy. The prayers of Lupito mixed into prayers for my brothers. So many different thoughts raced in my mind that I felt dizzy and very weary and sick. I ran the last of the way and slipped quietly into the house. I groped for the stair railing in the dark and felt a warm hand take mine. Startled, I looked upon into Ultima's brown, wrinkled face. "You know," I whispered. "I understand that she did not want my mother to hear." "See," she replied. "And the owl," I gasped. My mind searched for answers, but my body was so tired that my knees buckled and I fell forward. As small and as thin as Ultima was, she had the strength to lift me in her arms and carry me into her room. She placed me on her bed, and then by the light of a small, flickering candle, she mixed one of her herbs in a tin cup, held it over the flame to warm, then gave it to me to drink. "I killed Lupito," I said, and I gulped the medicine. "I know," she nodded. She prepared a new potion, and with this she washed the cuts off my face and feet. "Will he go to hell?" I asked. "That is not for us to say, Antonio. The war sickness was not taken out of him. He did not know what he was doing." "And the men on the bridge, my father?" "Men will do what they must do," she answered. She sat on the bed by my side. Her voice was soothing, and the drink she had given me made me sleepy. The wild, frightening excitement in my body began to die. "The ways of men are strange and hard to learn," I heard her say. "Will I learn them?" I asked. I felt the weight on my eyelids. "You will learn much. You will see much," I heard her faraway voice. I felt a blanket cover me. I felt safe in the warm sweetness of the room. Outside, the owl sang its dark questioning to the night, and I slept. But even into my deep, deep sleep, my dreams came. In my dream, I saw my three brothers. I saw them as I remembered them before they went away to war, which seemed to be long ago. They stood by the house that we rented in town, and they looked across the river at the hills of the Llano. "Father says that the town steals our freedom. He says that we must build a castle across the river on the lonely hill of the mockingbirds." I think it was Leon who spoke first. He was the eldest, and his voice always had a sad note to it, but in the dark mist of the dream, I could not be sure. His heart had been heavy since we came to the town. The second figure spoke. His forefathers were men of the sea. The modest people, they were conquistadors, men whose freedom was unbounded. It was Andrew who said that. It was Andrew, I was sure, because his voice was husky like his thick and sturdy body. Father says the freedom of the wild horse is in the modest blood, and his gaze is always westward. His fathers before him were vaqueros, and so he expects us to be men of the llano. I was sure the third voice belonged to Eugene. I longed to touch them. I was hungry for their company. Instead I spoke. "We must all gather around our father," I heard myself say. "His dream is to ride westward in search of new adventure. He builds highways that stretch into the sun, and we must travel that road with him." My brothers frowned. "You are a Luna," they chanted in unison. "You are to be a farmer priest for mother." The doves came to drink in the still pools of the river, and their cry was mournful in the darkness of my dream. My brothers laughed. "You are but a baby, Tony. You are our mother's dream. Stay and sleep till the doves coo while we cross the mighty river of the Carp to build our father's castle in the hills." "I must go," I cried to the three dark figures. "I must lift the muddy waters of the river in blessing to our new home." Along the river, the tormented cry of a lonely goddess filled the valley. The winding wail made the blood of men run cold. It is La Llorona, my brothers cried in fear, the old witch who cries along the river banks and seeks the blood of boys and men to drink. La Llorona seeks the soul of Antonio. It is the soul of Lupito, they cried in fear, doomed to wander the river at night because the waters wash his soul away. Lupito seeks his blessing. It is neither, I shouted. I swung the dark robe of the priest over my shoulders and lifted my hands in the air. The mist swirled around me and sparks flew when I spoke. It is the presence of the river. Save us, my brothers cried and cowered at my words. I spoke to the presence of the river, and it allowed my brothers to cross with their carpenter tools to build our castle on the hill. Behind us I heard my mother moan and cry, because with each turning of the sun, her son was growing old. Now I'm on tres. I just left. But because it's in Spanish. I'm on chapter tres, and I love this Spanglish book. I'm actually learning a little bit, to be 100 with you, and just books in general, man. Things like that make me so happy to start reading books and just, I don't know. This is a good book, man. It's a good book so far. I don't see why I should stop, right? I'm on chapter 3. Let me drink a little bit of water. And okay, yeah. Peace.